Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining in for today's workshop. With us, we have our facilitator, Wendy. Wendy is a very experienced debater, having experience across the globe in multiple debate formats and also across, say, school level as well as university level debating. I'm pretty sure the depth of experience that they have will help us a lot in terms of understanding these particular themes that we're addressing today in terms of humanizing social movement debates. And I'm sure that we'll have a lot of engagement and meaningful discussions. Handing over to Wendy then. Thank you so much for agreeing to take
Much
part.
for agreeing.
Um, Over to you.
Hi. Yeah, it's starting right now. All good, all good. I'm going to trust my lovely co-host to do the admin, and if you have any questions, you can put it in the chat box. If I see it, I will answer it. If not, I will answer it collectively at the end. So good afternoon, evening, hopefully not morning or late night for anyone who is listening to this. I'm Wendy. I am currently a second year on their gap year doing ancient literature. I have also debated for 7 years. Yes, an unfortunately long time. This debate is predominantly because I noticed that in a lot of circuits, especially in more conservative circuits where social movements or large-scale protests on the street aren't a particularly common thing, people tend to slightly demonize or, I guess, have interesting opinions or make slightly unstrategic generalizations about social movements, like our environmentalists or our angry mobs. All feminists hate men, etc., etc. And I do think for a lot of people who are very talented debaters and very experienced debaters also fall into the fallacy of just dumping a lot of words when it comes to social movement debate and forgetting actually social movements are composed of people. Social movements are actually very proximate, very close to us. For example, me using a paper straw and not a plastic straw perhaps is also supporting the environmentalist movement and things like that. Um, I'm going to do a quick caveat before I, go into the rest of the meeting. This is not a lecture about matter or spec on any feminist movement or any environmentalist or any social movement. If you want this, I recommend YouTube channels or Ryan Lafferty's matter file. Just search social movement in his matter file and it will come up. This is also not debate strategy or how to win social movement debates. This is also not a list of fancy rhetoric. For people who know, I come from an ESL background. My ESL status recently expired, but English is still not my first language. But this is not a movement. This is a lecture about a quick guide on how to avoid common mistakes I mentioned in social movement debates that just make judge think you sound less intuitive. This is also about making your rhetoric sound a lot more empathetic or your approach towards those debates. Generally, approach it as a human perspective, approach it as if you're talking to someone from those movements and doing an interview or trying to make friends with them. The final caveat I want to give is that debating is a subjective game, which is to say some judges will like this style. Some judges will like the style of Bozio, man them chair the global poor. Other debaters or other judges will say, I want matter dumping. I want 6 structural reasons on why I know murder is bad, rather than just saying a loss of life is something quite grief and tragic. So this is just personally why I think in the circuits I'm currently working in, so predominantly Northeast Asia or Asia in general, this is a very humanized way and very sensible and I think effective way of communicating your points during social movement debates. This is not the Bible for social movements. I do not claim that I am, a leader of social movements by any chance. Cool. Quick overview then. There are a lot of people drifting in. What
Don't
matter?
worry, Wendy. I'll take care of all of them. Don't worry at all.
Thank you. I will send the link of Ryan Lafferty's matter file out. I have your friend's DM, so shouldn't be a problem. And also, I think Ryan Lafferty, the current world champion, also published on his own Facebook page a 1,100 page long matter file specifically about, general topics in debating. If you think your issue is not rhetoric or how you approach the debate, but rather not having enough knowledge about those movements, either Ryan Lafferty or Wikipedia page is your place to go. I'm not an expert on mattering or fouling up stock knowledge either. Cool. people encounter that has either been given to me via feedback or just things I have observed as a judge that judges a lot of novice level spars. And lastly, what is humanization, how it happens, and several words of caution, I guess, to everyone who are still young, still in university, still potentially getting involved in social movements. Cool. There are broadly three pathways that I'm going to explain on how humanization occur. First, on focusing on actors and individuals in the social movements, so a women in the feminist movement, or Greta Thunberg in the environmentalist movement. The second is recognizing the movement as a spectrum, so there are moderate, left-leaning, extreme, conservative, radical, etc. parts of the movement. And lastly, just bring some third-party perspective into it. So, if you're a man but debating a feminist movement motion, you can still use your bystander perspective to humanize the debate. Cool. If anyone has, also you don't have to take notes of this. The PowerPoint will be shared. I believe my host will be in charge of distributing it at the end. Cool. There's also a recording for this. Cool. What is a social movement debate? This is a definition from the Wikipedia. A social movement is a collective, bracket often large and formal action taken by groups of people. Note, people, so we need to humanize it as a movement by the people for the people. To address perceived social problems, inequalities, or justice or injustice, aiming to bring out change in law, policies, or practices. So it don't have to always result in, a legal reform or a constitutional change like Roe v. Wade, which give abortion rights to women, which unfortunately now has been revoked. It can just be things like you no longer use inappropriate slurs towards people from LGBTQ background. You no longer use swear words against women in, for example, pop song or rap lyrics. It can be very minor, very down to earth, very people on the ground things. Cool. So normally when we talk about a social movement debate, explicitly it's any motion referring to X movement. For example, the feminist movements or the environmentalist movement. Like this house as a feminist movement, it boycott K-pop industry. This house as the environmentalist movement, it engage in violent protests. Or implicitly, for example, this house regrets, THR means this house regrets, rise of a certain phenomenon. Like this house regrets the rise of cancel culture, which is linked to, for example, feminist movements or environmentalist movements, canceling celebrities that seem to have violated principles in their movement. Or this house opposes the glorification of motherhood, which doesn't mention any social movement, but the idea or ideologies behind it is linked to feminism, such as individuality, I wouldn't say forcing, but coercing women to give birth to children is fundamentally bad. It's a violation of their agency. Antinatalism, which is the idea or ideology against having children, which is linked to the environmentalist movement because, more population, more children, bad for planet Earth, etc. I think realizing that there are a lot of implicit social movement context behind those motions are often quite important because you can avoid yourself from, I guess, falling into the slippery slope of the reason people oppose glorification of motherhood is because angry feminists told them to do so. Well, no, not really. Mothers are human beings, potential mothers are human beings. They have their own thoughts, feelings, emotions. They are very likely to have concluded that they don't want their motherhood to be glorified, or on opposition side, they do want their motherhood to be glorified as their own decision through their own process. Cool. Some common difficulties. The first is generalization, which again, like in equity briefings, we tell people not to do that. Even in like debate rounds, we say that generalization is unpersuasive, not nuanced, etc. It looks like saying all queer people are liberal or all vegetarians care deeply about the environment. Not particularly true. I know some vegetarians just do it for religious reasons. Some vegetarians just do it because they have certain health conditions that means they can't digest certain kinds of proteins. The second is buzzword cloud. Top down, bottom up. This is a grassroots movement. This causes alienation of the moderates. We have finite resources, so we need to give it to the most vulnerable people. what does it mean? It's just words to debaters who are new to it, to your opponents that don't believe in the social movement, or even to judges who are novice judges, trainees, panelists, or even experienced judges who are looking for you to use those buzzwords to bring out more important things behind those buzzwords. This is, the very famous meme I think Yao Kun posted on shit posting about, people just keep saying those words without actually say anything meaningful behind it. This is the tipping point. What does that even mean? I'm going to give you mechanisms. This is weighing on a principle. What principle? Cool. The last thing is cursive spec, which is, I think, as some of you might have experienced, if you have, intersectional interest in both social movements and debating or BP debating. If you're very ardent about a movement, for example, I can recite 3 waves of the feminist movement and what each wave is about, this can come back to bite you because you might get lost in the sauce. You might start dumping specific knowledge, i.e. spec knowledge, about a certain movement. Or if you're a big fan of Greta Thunberg, you can talk about how difficult his process of campaigning is. You can end up talking about why exactly, baby polar bears dying on an ice cap is bad without linking it back to the debate. I think, obviously this workshop is majoritarianly targeted at novices who don't do much social moves and debates or don't have much knowledge. But if you are one, or you happen to be friends of one, which I'm looking at my fellow friends who have seen me trauma dump in social movement debates, do give them this word of caution. Do not get lost in the sauce. It's still about informing an average informed voter within 7 minutes of speech. It's not about, doing a lecture or doing a workshop on the second wave feminist literature or things like that. Cool. So this is the 3 main difficulties, and I did come up with 3 pathways to tackle it. So don't worry, I will give you the solvency. I've spotted the problem. Now comes the solution. Cool. Pathway 1, individual actors and yourself. In debating, when we say vulnerable individuals, describe who they are and what they experience. Which is say, don't just say, vulnerable individuals are what we ought to care about. It's vulnerable. You're saying this thing is bad. Is it because it is bad? Like this it is a buzzword for debaters, but not actually a buzzword for people who might come from a different country or come from a different circuit, that in their meta, vulnerability weighing may not even be a thing. So ask yourself, who are they? Maybe there are women with 3 kids who are recently divorced by their husband. Maybe there are farmers who fail to grow nice potatoes because global warming has ruined the temperature for growing, nice potatoes. And what do they experience? Because often we struggle to imagine difficulties and sufferings we hadn't experienced, which I think is an unfortunate limitation we have, but it's also the beauty of BP debating. It forces you to step into someone else's truth, whether it's an actor motion, so this house as Donald Trump, or this house as a farmer, or even just in social movement debates, you have to think about why people support it. I think, for example, like I am a Chinese WGM who has never lived in South Africa or never had the experience of living in a war-torn country like Ukraine, like Palestine, which is to say, I cannot meaningfully give a speech about why a pacifist movement really, really matters in the same way someone from a Ukrainian or Palestinian background is able to. But if you struggle here, like if you're a man who has never experienced period pain, or if you're a straight person who has never experienced homophobic slurs being used at you, you can still think about general universal experiences, like being overwhelmed by deadlines or post-debate tournament burnout and what that feels like. You can say things like, it make you feel that you're the worst person on planet Earth, that your efforts are not worthy of it because you have taken, 1 points in a 5-round tournament. You finished on 5 out of 15. This is not dissimilar to what the farmers have felt when their potato have taken a 5 out of 15, I know, survival rate because 5 out of the 15 potato plants they grew failed or something like that. So I have an example here, which is to say, don't just say people on the ground suffer the most from global warming. Characterize it. Describe what the experience is like. It's called characterization. It's called impacting. It's called having a visceral impact. So you say when tax on oil happens, people who are from lower income household have to make a choice between heating for the entire family or sending their youngest child to school. This is the kind of things we talk about when, we talk about this house believes this house as the government would tax any unrenewable energy like coal, oil, gas by 100%. Increasing the tax on oil, increasing the tax on coal, increasing the tax on anything that's not, green energy. Obviously, this is not a social movement debate. This is a policy debate about taxation. But environmentalist movements come in, and environmentalist movements are often criticized for not acknowledging the people on the ground's need for those unrenewable energies. So rather than saying, this is regressive, people suffer the most when they're poor, this is generalization, this is not extremely convincing, but we will paint a picture of a father sitting in front of a table and thinking between whether his monthly bill payment is going to go to heating, because now heating is much more expensive, or sending the youngest child who recently hit the age of 6 to primary school. It becomes something much more humanized or much more relatable because we have all had moments, maybe like we're not at the age of sending our children to school, I would imagine, but maybe imagining having to make difficult choices between whether to go to a debate tournament or buy yourself, I know, a new, I know, cooking pan because your old cooking pan broke down. Cool. The second pathway I want to talk about is the spectrum. I'm not going to quite draw a spectrum out here because I think it's slightly demeaning to, literally say, everything in this world is a spectrum. But I do think there are a scale between the more conservative or the more gentle ways of approaching a movement to the most extreme or radical end. I think what's really important to bear in mind is not everyone in a movement is on the extreme ends of things. This is to say, often moderates are actually the largest portion of a movement. I think this is from Tages, one of his workshops, where he mentioned that 60% of American women believe in feminist ideologies, which is to say, they think it is important for women to get maternity leave. It is important for women to get equal pay. So these are against gendered pay gap, obviously. It's important for women to be able to be protected after trigger warning crimes like sexual assault happen, because law should establish a space where women are able to seek justice, but only 13% feel comfortable labeling themselves as feminist or associate with the movement. This is to say, a lot of people have moderate beliefs in those ideologies, but don't want to radically go out there and march on International Women's Day because they're afraid of being labeled as an extremist, a radical feminist, a crazy woman, as some patriarchal rhetoric would say. I think what my personal advice here is, because there's such a large portion of the movement, you should acknowledge their existence, point out their limitations, i.e., they don't really do much, which is probably true. In some contexts, like moderate Chinese women don't go out there and protest because they're afraid of government backlash. But you should also be charitable to their contributions. So I think I have an example on the next slide. Yes. So when talking about the moderate, don't say, if we push for something really radical, the moderates will get scared and won't support this, or the moderates never do anything. Who are the moderates? Again, if you skip all the way back to individual actors, who are they? I'm not sure if you can. Can I annotate this? Yeah, I can probably annotate this. Oh, I cannot. That's sad. But think about who are they and what do they experience, right? Because the first part I was talking about do not generalize. The second part, when we're talking about not using buzzwords, moderate is a very large scale. Within the moderates, there are very cooperative moderates. There are very conservative moderates. For example, in the feminist movement, some are pro-gender pay gap because they're so conservative. They believe that in manual labor, women are just less worthy than men. And they still support the feminist movement in other ways. For example, by being a good mother. For example, by providing healthcare to women who have gone through like abortion, or providing healthcare to women who have like specific things like breast cancer that are a specific female organ related disease that don't get as much funding in a general kind of academic research setting. So don't say they don't do anything because, never say never, but also it's not a charitable way of characterizing them. But do say the moderates are often most likely to be palatable because they support generally approved small things like not using too many plastic packaging. It's very easy to say plastic is bad because they're killing baby turtles and baby seals, in comparison to the anti-oil movement that literally put tomato soup on expensive paintings of Van Gogh. In comparison, the moderates are more likely to be palatable. They're more likely to be accepted. People are more likely to think they're not scary people. They're reasonable people who don't put tomato soup onto a painting. I think being able to anchor it to small things you see around you or on the news is quite vivid in the comparative, because you can say, look, on one hand, we have people spilling soup onto paintings. On the other hand, I'm not sure if you can see my gesture, but I'm gesturing. On the other hand, you have someone who used paper straws. I think those two in comparison makes the moderate becomes much more palatable. Again, I know it sounds slightly patronizing while I'm doing this in baby talk, but in a lot of debates, it is required. It's actually quite strategic to treat your judges as if they understand nothing and spoon feed them the specific informations that you think will be advantageous to you during deliberation. Cool. The second part of the spectrum, which I call it the extreme, but I think radical is probably the better word. That's why I put it in quotation marks. It's because people outside the movement often like to characterize less palatable parts of the movement as the extreme. So I think the first thing I do want to acknowledge is radical ends of the movement does exist, but they're not simply irrational actors. Which is to say, when people do things that seem radical, it's often not because they decided to do it in the heat of the movement, in the heat of the moment, or they just got drunk or got high and decided to be really stupid and ruin their career just because they enjoy shouting something that's controversial or raining a painting that's really expensive. This is some structural reasons I have listed, but obviously it's not limited to this. It's obviously much more complicated and nuanced. It's often a mixture of all of those things. Like there are external pressure. For example, if you're in a religious movement, your religious leader might pressure you into doing certain things to prove your piety or loyalty to the religion. There might be a sense of urgency. Like, for example, your village might literally be the village that got drowned because of rising sea levels. You're now homeless because of oil companies polluting planet Earth. So you need a home. You think this is really a bad issue that's affecting everyone, including yourself, including members of your village. There are a lack of alternatives, which is to say, for example, you know, if you're a queer person in a deeply, deeply queerphobic country, it's very hard for you to take a moderate stance of, hi, I support some queer ideologies, but I'm not quite pro-gay marriage yet. As soon as you signal that you're not averted to or show some degree of endorsement to something that's considered anti-establishment, it's very likely that people will crack down on you. It's very likely that you cannot take a step back or turn back to the old establishment because you have signaled that you're someone who is pro something that the government or the current ruling class is against. So there's a lack of alternatives. You can't turn back. You can't undo your support of the movement. So you're kind of being forced to go on to the more extreme end of it because people who are ruling the country or endorsing certain anti-queer propaganda is saying you're either one of them, or sorry, you're either us or one of them. There isn't a nuanced middle ground, moderate space for you to be in certain countries. Like, for example, in the Israel-Palestine issue in Israel, you can't say, I support both. Or on certain queer issues in China, you can't say, I endorse some parts of the queer ideology, but don't worry, I'm still pro-conservative Chinese norms. Those are mutually exclusive. Those are, unfortunately, I think, for certain political climates, diametrically opposed in some instance. Like, even if we take it to the more extreme stance, like Afghanistan under Taliban occupation, you can't say, I'm pro some degree of feminist ideology, but I'm not actually that much a feminist. I still support Taliban's ideology, but I support women going to school. Well, that is not a part of Taliban's ideology. So you're locked into a lack of alternatives. You have to go all the way to the most extreme end because of a lack of alternatives or a lack of opt-out or a lack of ability to turn back or undo what you have said. The last thing I wanted to posit is personal trauma. I do think this is a lot of the reason why people join social movements. It's a bit similar to the sense of urgency. If you're someone who has personally been impacted by environmental damage, like, your entire village got hit by climate change or genetic mutation, and the village is now dying from famine. The entire river of your village is polluted, and now no one have clean drinking water. All of those things are deeply traumatic things that make you feel almost there are no reparative justice unless you go to the most extreme end. You aim you aim for the first and you end up taking the second in a debate round. You aim for the most radical and then you get a moderately good resolution for your village who is dying from famine or dying from water pollution. For feminist movement, it looks like, if you're personally a victim of trigger warning sexual abuse, you're likely to aim for example, death penalty for everyone who have conducted rape. And then you say the moderately good resolution is, say, 10 years of sentencing or 5 years of sentencing and chemical castration. So you're more likely, out of your own motivation of personal trauma, to aim for something that you consider undoable but relatively cathartic in order for it to eventually be moderated back into the conventionally acceptable or conventionally approved moderate resolution, because the current thing is shifting towards an unfavorable resolution. So you aim for a radically very in your favor resolution to counterbalance it out. Again, I wish I could draw on this a graph that have been really useful. Cool. When talking about okay. When talking about the extreme, I think the first thing, like, again, this is an equity violation. If you do it in most tournaments I have been to, do not say extreme feminists hate men, or even don't say extreme feminists are considered as being hateful to men by men. Even if you point out that generalization exists, it doesn't add much to the debate. But do say some involved in the movement are self-motivated by continuous reminder of past trauma and therefore prioritizes catharsis over pragmatics. This sounds much more charitable than crazy feminists hate men. This sounds more sensible than and more, I think, in-depth or more structural observation of why extreme ideologies manifest. And then you can anchor it back because, like I said, do not use word buzzes. Do not just say top down. Do not just say catharsis. I swear to God, there is literally like catharsis on this graph at some point. Yes, self-actualization. There we go. On the corner of the bottom left. Cool. Say things like, if I am waking up every day and my scars from domestic abuse hurt, I want to burn with the grief and anger via marching onto the streets, not via writing letters to do legal reforms. And then you convey it because legal reforms take much longer, because it's less accessible, there is less guarantee that you will succeed, so likelihood of success. But if you go there and march, it's guaranteed that someone will see you march, someone will cheer you on, someone will maybe pat you on the back if it's International Women's Day. It's guaranteed that the news will probably report of your march. etc., etc. So again, say structural reasons on why people prioritize the more extreme end over the more moderate end, and then say an example of what does this quote unquote slightly more extreme way of doing things look like. The last part of the spectrum is how, the moderate and the extreme may have internal tension. This is something I have actually heard in my life. Someone in a feminist debate told me that people end up arguing and nothing gets done. Even if that's true, that, argument delays the process of things, it sounds really demeaning. Especially if you're, again, I'm not the biggest fan of identity politics, but I do think when you're a cisgender straight white man saying, ah, feminist movements never really work because girls just yap and argue against each other and nothing gets done. As a full female panel, we're going to think that you don't actually understand the movement and you're just using debate as an opportunity to vent out your personal anger. So you're not an objective or you're not addressing an average informed voter in a palatable manner. Or like say buzzwords like resources finite. So what? Always don't stop there. Don't say there's internal tension. Don't say the moderate and the extreme don't work together. What is the impact? Why do they not work together? So do say things like investing money in transgender healthcare becomes controversial when women are dying in back alley abortion clinics. You put the context of why money is finite because you can't support both branch of healthcare, and then you talk about how most women in the feminist movement are likely, by statistics, cisgender women who feels that their rights are perhaps for selfish reasons or for community reasons more important, like i.e. their right of not dying from abortion after Trump overturned Roe v. Wade. Their right for not dying from abortion is more important than, for example, building a gender neutral or third gender toilet in one of the hospital buildings that they're working in. I think being able to anchor those things, being able to describe again, like I really wish I could draw and carry it out. Describe their experiences, describe who they are and what they experience. It literally looks like anger from younger women who are, friends of someone who died from abortion saying, can you please invest some money to upgrade the, I don't know, tools or upgrade the sanitary level of those back alley clinics? Or can you please divest some money to get Trump to not overturn Roe v. Wade? Before we talk about, there are technically 6 kinds of gender neutral bathrooms we could construct in this school building. Of course, those things are important, but it is less urgent or less proximate to certain actors. This is how internal tension occur, because we have to acknowledge that all human beings are somewhat selfish, are somewhat limited in what they can see. Like, for example, I'm assigned female at birth, so I'm not someone who struggles with which specific toilet block should I enter. But I am someone who struggled with, for example, things like not having enough access to relevant legal knowledge on how to protect myself against, sexual assault or how to pursue perpetrators of sexual assault when, he hadn't left enough significant bodily evidence on me for me to go to the police station. So I'm more likely to be interested in donating to a charity that teaches young women how to protect themselves in the immediate aftermath of sexual assault than to donate to a transgender clinic, or sorry, a transgender health clinic that helps, for example, adolescents going through transgender surgery to maintain their hormone levels, because I have not gone through that. This is an example. I do also work for charities that donate to that. Please do not cancel me. I'm not transphobic. Cool. Uh, the first thing I want to talk about, like, as a subsection, is what we mean by potential allies, because I did mention, for example, I am not I did not go through transgender surgery in my teenage years, but I also are willing to donate to those clinics that helps other teenagers, because I do believe they're quite disadvantaged, in the status quo, especially with Donald Trump doing all of those. Let's revoke all the EDI policy. believing feminism. Men can be allies for the cause. Yes, we know that. How does it manifest? Why is it likely for it to manifest? Say, even if my aunt is against sex before marriage because she is quite conservative, she still believes in sanitary pads should be cheaper and votes for clauses allowing maternity leave. All three of those things are branches of the feminist movement, i.e., sexual liberation, bracket sex before marriage, more like less pink tax, i.e., sanitary pads becoming cheaper, equal pay or eliminating workplace discrimination, i.e., allowing maternity leave. All of those things are branches of ways in terms of how feminist movement manifest. And it's crucial to say, don't just say conservative women also believe in feminism. I highly doubt that conservative women believe in hookup culture, which some feminist ideologies or some feminist activists like to co-opt as a part of their agenda, right? So be specific. Again, describe who the actor is. Maybe it's your 50-year-old aunt. If you don't have one, make one up. Debating is about lying in a sensible, logical, and respectful manner. Cool. The last thing I want to talk about is other parties and actors proximate or associated with those in the movement. So always bear in mind, activists are not actually an isolated island, although some of you who have participated in the clauses feel like that, and certain media like to paint or isolate activists as a soul, like a loner or a soul hero, etc. I think always bearing in mind what is the role of their family. Like, do they have supportive parents? Do they have, parents who are relatively conservative but are willing to give them money or fund them to do a relatively ambitious project or start a business company that are aimed at young women's education? Do those parents or their friends become their weak spot? Because, for example, I don't mind if people are threatening me and using homophobic slurs at me, but if my friend, who is literally a bystander, is getting attacked because he is associating with me, who is involved in certain movements, then I will start feeling bad. This might deter me from further radicalizing my ideology or my campaign. And are they a source of trauma? Like, for example, did my mom die from, I know, like, this is really bad, trigger warning. Did certain members of my family die from things like breast cancer, which means I'm more likely to be invested in female healthcare or specialized treatment for women with cancer? And what about their spouse and children? For example, my future husband may want to divorce me if I keep campaigning for feminist ideologies. A lot of women who supported the suffragist movement, the women's suffrage in 1920s in London, were threatened by their husband to say, "You're a disgrace of the family. My children do not want a mother like you," etc., etc. I think all of those things can become either motivating factors or demotivating factors for members of the movement. And I think it's important to recognize that those people exist, and you could always mention it when, proposition or the other bench mention activists are alone, they're fully with agency. Sure, they have their full independent agency, but we're still a community, like we're still herd animals. We still rely on our community. We still care about the positive feedback loop or whatnot that our community gives us. I think in this sense, I believe whether you're in a feminist movement or social movement or in a debate or not, no one is an island. And it's important to bear in mind when you're debating, when you're not debating, that people are not islands and you're not a island. This generally concludes the debate. I tried to cut it around 40 minutes, so there are 15 minutes for Q&A. Cool. If you have any question, you can unmute, let me know, or just type it in the chat box. I will stop sharing, and if you also have any questions that you don't want to ask here, you can DM me. Most of you have me either on Instagram or WeChat. You can also DM me in the Zoom chat box if you don't want everyone to see your question. Cool. I hope that was generally productive.
It was very nice, Wendy. I have one small question. So, in times when people are not culturally sensitive, also because maybe you do not have the idea about, say, what maybe I'm doing in India or maybe somebody else is doing in the US, sometimes people do take missteps. So how do you like rectify those mistakes that you do within the debate space?
I think the first thing is if you immediately note, well, like it depends the time frame of when you noticed it. If you notice it immediately after you said it in the round, you can say, sorry, I didn't mean that. And that will be fine. For example, if I said, queer people are always very liberal, and I realize this is wrong, I can just say, sorry, not always liberal. On a balance of probability, more likely to be liberal. Apologies for that. If I realize it after the debate, I can just, apologize to all the judges or to the person in the room that seemed particularly impacted. Like, if I ignore someone's pronoun or POI preference, I will also personally go there and apologize as long as they feel comfortable interacting with me. If it's after a very long time frame, like for example, I realized maybe 5 years ago, I always confused non-binary people and transgender people, and I use those two terms incorrectly and interchangeably. I think it's something like you should just like I obviously cannot walk up to every non-binary person I have called a transgender person in the past 5 years and apologize to them because between the age of 13 to 18, I was not educated by the terminologies in English. I was very ESL. Um, I think the two ways to rectify is A, you say it to other people who are making those mistakes, so you become a quote unquote moral bystander that call people out. So, for example, if my Chinese friends now make this mistake, I will be, hey, I made this mistake. I know in Chinese they're the same word, but please do not say that. It's actually quite offensive. I think also educating others, because like now I'm acknowledging and owning up to it in front of you guys and saying, look, it's not appropriate for me to do. I'd encourage everyone to avoid it. I think not being defensive of your past mistakes is often the first step. Rather than saying, if you're trying to correct my English usage, you're being really racist to me because I'm ESL. That's not a helpful attitude to engage in the race to the bottom, to be protective of your own mistakes. Um, I'm not sure if that's the answer you were looking for.
No, that answers it perfectly. I think Imran also has a question on the chat. He mentions, how do you illustrate, characterize visceral impact of an ex-actor in a way that is emotionally compelling and persuasive without judges being like, well, it was just rhetorical, so yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like obviously, again, this is not a lecture about rhetorics. This is a lecture about how to avoid sounding like a really cold-blooded asshole when, you're saying feminist movement doesn't get things down, they just argue. I can literally say the exact same thing without making it sound offensive and therefore more palatable to judges. How do you illustrate, characterize visceral impacts of X actor compounding and persuasion? It's just oh, um, I think the first thing is avoid trigger warnings. So like, I have had a kid that started his speech with rape is bad, not needed. Like very emotionally compelling, bracket very emotionally triggering. Judges likely just filter it out because people do have an aversion of shutting down when they hear extremely bad things. So, all the equity things. Do not use graphic language, do not use graphic illustrations, do not talk about, graphic injury details or something if you're talking about people from war-torn countries, etc. The second thing I would say is always make sure the analysis gets there. I'm screen sharing it. Always make sure the analysis gets there before the impact gets there. So that's really odd. Why is my PowerPoint not sharing? It is sharing. That is good. Always make sure the analysis gets there before the rhetoric gets there, right? So before you say, if I wake up every day with my scars from domestic abuse, say self-motivation is a result of continuous reminder of past trauma because A, they're ubiquitous, B, they're really deep rooted, C, some damage are irreversible. If I lost my hearing from domestic abuse because my husband hits me too hard, that's an irreversible harm. Do all of those analysis of structural reasons, do all the analysis on the weighing, and then you say, example that's quite rhetorical, that's quite vivid, that's quite emotionally compelling. Like, and Like this is the second thing, the waking up every day is not a replacement of the analysis that has to come before it. The reason I say humanizing social movement debates is I'm assuming everyone here already know how to do analysis or structural reasons for social movement debates before you add, like, this is the cherry on the top, or like sprinkling salt and pepper onto the already cooked steak. So, do not just put salt and pepper on the plate without the steak actually there. That would not be good. Um, cool. Let me go back to the main meeting. Someone is asking,
There are quite a few questions actually for you. I think Syed asked one, I think Toby asked one, and Milind asked a couple. Jason also asked a couple.
oh wait, you get backlash. First of all, this is again very stock arguments. I have to obviously like wait until I'm in the round and see the round myself to be able to know, like what specific kind of backlash or what specific argument did you run. If you say I'm going to kill every man who has ever disrespected women, they're probably fair to argue that you will get backlash, right? Like, I think normally the first thing you say is symmetrical, which is to say people who are anti that movement will always find an excuse to latch onto you and backlash. The second thing you say is a worthy trade-off. Because if two women are harmed by this backlash, but a million women is saved, you do the likelihood or do this scope weighing. The last thing you say is just they can just respond by saying, like, call out their assertiveness. They can just respond by saying, you will get backlash. Why are people likely to backlash? Why do they have incentive? Why do they have capacity? Why will the backlash actually happen to me? Because, for example, if I hold it Pride Month open and some really conservative Pakistani religious groups decided to say, I hate Wendy for hosting this in their own internal group chat. That doesn't really impact me, other than maybe they give me like a negative karma score in their mind. That doesn't really impact me in reality. So, to what extent does that backlash impact me? So, challenge them. What is the incentive? What is the capacity? To what extent am I being impacted? Um, sorry for butchering the pronunciation. I hope this answers the question. Toby, how do we prove that these main actors that buy into these movements will still be affected by secondary actors, especially in a motion that prioritizes them above all? Is it a wise strategy to do this? And if not, what can one do? Can you please give an example of the motion? I will circle back to you. Like again, I'm not particularly sure what you're asking. I'm just saying, I'm assuming you're asking whether we should bring in third-party actors in a actor debate, but I will circle back to you. This is a very long question. Cool. Mr. Ms. Sharma, Mr. Sharma, the idea of when the damage is done by your earlier speakers, this sometimes gets seen as not being aligned with the earlier speakers. Any way to avoid that? Again, I'm really sorry. Like, are you saying that the damage of the movement is already done? Like, I already get a negative 100 aura by the Pakistani religious group, or
No, the question is much more like an image of these actors being in like a certain light has already been set in like the debate's mind. Like first speaker, second speaker have already talked about them in quite shallow terms. But when I, as a second speaker, as a third speaker, come up and try to humanize these actors to outframe certain ideas, it is seen then as it not being in line with my earlier speakers. So, like, is there any way to avoid that, or is it just like something I have to be?
is this BP or AP? Because in BP, you don't have to have bench solidarity.
AP.
Okay, sorry. You're the second, you and the first speaker are in the same team, I imagine. Or am I being stupid? Like, are you an extension speaker? Are you a VIP speaker? Are you a deputy speaker? PM? DPM?
Second or third.
So I
Um,
think they're asking from an AP perspective, and they're saying that my first speaker was very shallow with my framing about the actor's particular interests and other works. And then as a deputy or as a whip, how do you sort of like work around that aspect?
okay, so not sorry. I'm thinking of back of um I'm thinking of if OG is being stupid, how do you rectify this as CG? I'm like, don't rectify, way over that because as CG you're supposed to beat OG. I'm being stupid. Forgive me. The first thing you do is that even if they have already given the framing, you can use it as an impact. If they say, there are really vulnerable actors, you can say, I'm going to specifically impact out how those vulnerable actors are affected, and then you bring the things of paying for heating, you bring in the things about sending children to school. Um, if they are really shallow in their characterization and op calls it out, you can say this is rebuttal to opposition. You don't have to say my first speaker is wrong. Do not ever knife your own debate teammate. This is not nice. They will be sad. The judge will not like this. I would say this is either impacting or reconstructing my first speaker, or saying frame it as this is rebuttal to the opposition bench who has very uncharitably attacked our side's first speaker. I think this just is just a framing thing that like on how you present it that makes it more palatable to judge. I don't think most judges will say that you're inconsistent between your first and the second if your argument is still the same. If both of you believe that farmers need to be protected, you're still aligned. It's just one did very little characterization or very shallow characterization. The other did much more characterization. You will probably just get higher speaks. If they're saying farmers are not important because the damage is done, you can say that even when the damage is done, future farmers might be impacted and say that we're engaging in the worst case scenario of sure, even if all the farmers are already a lost cause because they are already starved to death, future farmers that may starve to death still matters. So what you're doing, say, even in our worst case scenario, we still have important people we need to protect, which outweighs our bench or outweighs the other bench. The other benches, sorry, BP has 4 benches. Uh, Jason. For example, the actor in the motion is something we can relate to deeply. Oftentimes, we can oversimplify our experience for the sake of time. Rick being seen as not acknowledged, slightly dismissive of the issue at hand. How to address this? I'm surprised that if you can relate to it deeply, that you're likely to oversimplify it. Maybe I'm a bit of a trauma dumper, and I like to talk about details I can relate to. For me personally, I think the first thing is try not to bring your own experience into it because it's your experience is not accessible to an average informed voter. You can just say a lot of, for example, if you're queer, say a lot of queer people, or if you're I don't know, like disabled, you say a lot of disabled people experience this and that. Give a few examples of what you have experienced. Like for example, I'm disabled. I say a lot of I don't say I experience this. I say a lot of disabled people experience the awkwardness of having to walk in with a crutch when everyone is staring at you. A lot of disabled people experience the silence in the air when they mention, sorry, I can see. I didn't mean to crash into you, and everyone's suddenly feeling as if they're guilty of something when they're just narrating their own disability as a factual statement rather than trying to pity grab. I think having an example or two is enough because, again, this is the salt and pepper on the top. If this is like if the salt and pepper is simplified, I don't think this is a extremely large issue as long as the analysis is still there. For example, you can never run away from your disability. Societal narrative coerces people with disability to shut up because they don't want to be bullied for being the odd one out. As long as all the analysis prior to this salt and pepper or prior to this experience and characterization part is already there, it shouldn't be a problem. Zoe, how can quite extreme feminist movements cater to religious, quite conservative female? Is there a possibility encounter these kind of emotion? Thank you. Um, I think it depends, like, because again, we're falling into the hole of generalization again. Like when you say quite extreme feminist, are we talking about all men should go extinct kind of extreme feminist, or are we talking about sexual liberation, or are we just talking about, say, for example, the 4B60 feminist movement? Because if you say all men should go extinct, I think no average informed person or religious, let alone religious groups, would be supportive of that because human extinction, bad. If you're talking about the 4B60 movement, I think obviously there are common ground like celibacy. 4B60 is a movement in South Korea about four things you don't do as men and 6 boycotts, 6 boycotts you do towards certain male-dominated industries. So in one of the 4B, one of it is no sex. No sex with men. This obviously overlaps with religious ideologies of staying celibate. So you can say, actually, rather than calling myself a radical feminist, I'm just really religious, so I'm not going to have sex with men, right? So I think finding the overlaps is always there. It's not always as easy. I acknowledge that religion and conservative ideologies are sometimes mutually exclusive to certain feminist ideologies. But you know, I think there are common things like domestic abuse is bad that transcends the boundary of religion because it's about you should treat your neighbors kindly. You should not hit other people. You should not covet possessions of others, which are related to you should not be nasty to other female for having achievements. Girls help girls. You should not beat up your wife because that shall not be harmful to others in biblical teaching. I think all of those things do interact with each other. And rather than saying that the movement can be palatable, you can say the ideologies, again, like the example I used of 60% of women like the ideologies, but don't want to be labeled as part of the movement. You can say the ideologies are palatable or able to cope buying from religious and conservative women, even if the movement itself doesn't. Once they believe in your ideology, I think it's a matter of time or a matter of personal choice on whether or not they do a little feminism hashtag next to themselves. So yeah, I hope this answers your question. This is a very difficult thing to do, even for someone that debated a lot of feminist motions. I sincerely hope you don't encounter more difficult motions like that. Toby, you have your hand raised, and then I will get back to Rose.
Okay, yeah. So I'm sorry. I've been having some issues with my device. I've been trying to like use math for a while now, but it wasn't going. So like what I was trying to talk about earlier was like promotions that ask you to like prioritize a particular actor. So this motions like maybe this house as a feminist or as a side B Christian, and they ask you to maybe choose between two like let's say two objectives. So either maybe joining the LGBTQ movement at the expense of the faith of their faith for like a side Christian. I think there was a motion that I debated like that. And the problem that I usually get in those sort of motions is trying to prove that even though this individual is someone that will necessarily want to do something for themselves, they are still sort of indirectly affected by like secondary actors, like maybe their parents and other individuals. So what I noticed is
Uh,
that majority of the time when I try to bring up examples, I usually lose the debate because like they said, oh, the individual still wants to do this thing for themselves and all that. So what I was trying to ask is it like a wise strategy to bring up secondary actors when you are like expected to prioritize the needs of that particular
right,
individual? Or
got it.
what other like sorry, what other methods do we use to like tackle that?
Got it. I think obviously the priority or the emphasis of the debate should be on the actors themselves. If this is saying this house as a feminist would join Pride March, the debate is obviously about this feminist and then people at the Pride March, not about this religious man in Pakistan, right? So obviously prioritize the actor. But I do think talking about third-party actors still matter because this is about the efficacy or capacity of it being successful. For example, if you want a social movement to succeed, you can't just have every feminist supporting it. You also have to have conservative men who make laws supporting it. You also have to have the conservative president of America, the conservative chairman of China supporting it. So I think if you want to talk about catharsis, then no, you do not need to bring third-party actors in. But if you want to talk about policy passing or efficacy of a certain policy, then you still do have to bring third-party actors in. I hope this makes sense.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. Rose, are moderates same as left centrists? No. When I talk about moderates, I'm not talking about the political spectrum. The political spectrum obviously have the center or the centrist, center left, radically left, far left. And like far left is probably Marxists, and far right is probably Nazis like Hitler. When we are talking about social movements, there's no left or right because likely a lot of social movements are already left-leaning. When I talk about moderate or extreme, it talks about to what extent you're willing to do for the social movement. My bad for not clarifying it. It's not the idea of left-leaning, right-leaning, centrist-leaning, or far right, far left that we're using in politics lectures. But in this lecture, moderate just means you're supportive to the movement, but you're unlikely to do any meaningful action for it. Or like say conservative means you don't like this movement. You think the status quo is quite good. And radical means I'm going to be Greta Thunberg, drop out of school just to protest against climate change. Apologies for the wording. Cool.
So I'm sorry, just like one last question.
Yeah.
I'm assuming the humanization of actors and how the actions they take is usually most important for people who are on the fence regarding the said topic, like potential allies or moderates, because here's usually where things get scummy or like how they might act. The problem is like when good teams debate against each other, these usually just become parallel lines. Like example, a religious parent having a queer child, both sides can have some form of humanizations. But in these scenarios, it becomes like really hard. Like what the judge will buy. Like how do you like surpass this idea?
Sorry, can someone translate it for my ESL brain? As in like both sides are trying to co-opt. Wait, sorry, let me read this. Thank you. Like the potential allies among the early just become parallel lines of good teams doing that religious encourage all both sides can work through. Cool. The first thing is I don't think humanization just applies to people on the fence. I think, for example, a very, very ardent feminist who has been working for this industry, like I know one, who has been working in this industry for 13 years, also require a lot of humanization of this debate. Because I think, like, sorry, um, if sorry, people on the fence as in actors on the fence within the debate or judges listening in the panel who are on the fence in terms of giving the props the win or giving government or ops the win. Just clarifying, who are we talking about on the fence? Actors in the debate we're debating about, or yeah, okay, cool. Gotcha. Not the judge who is deciding whether or not he is gay. Cool. Got it. No, I think people who have being in the industry, whoever ardent, also needs a humanized characterization because people kind of talk about, she is just going to be supportive of the feminist movement forever. No, people get jaded, people get tired, people get burnout. I have been debating for 7 years. I've been working in a female scholarship for educating girls in rural China for 7 years too. Every day I'm feeling extremely tired of it because progress doesn't really happen. I feel burnout. I feel despite I'm not really on the fence, I have crossed the fence 7 years ago. Sometimes I want to run away and hop out of the fence and go into the wild because I'm tired of all of this, right? I think people who have been in there for really long or people who are extremely conservative and hateful towards the movement are not just demons who hate gay people. They probably have personal traumas such as being trigger warning, sexually assaulted by someone who was gay when they were a young boy, etc., etc. I think people who are on far ends i.e., not in the middle, not actors who are sitting on the fence, also require humanist characterization for your case to be compelling. Often those people are easier to characterize, in my humble opinion. The second thing you talk about is how to avoid it being parallel lines. I don't think it's the evil is harm. Oftentimes debate, obviously engagement is good, but oftentimes debates do become both sides have a case of them tipping into the movement or them tipping out of the movement. In your kid, the religious parents with a queer child. I think both sides probably can make a convincing case of them opting into LGBT movement or them boycotting LGBT movement. I think both sides are sensible. I think it's speculative, right? So I think when you talk about those actors who, unless you have actually met one in real life, you don't quite know how they will respond to scenario, it's quite important to say that, they are speculative, hence we do not care about them because it's so uncertain, or because they're on the fence, because they're likely to be where the tipping point is, we really care about them. I think deciding a strategy of what you want to do with those religious parents, or please substitute conservative men who have a feminist wife, or any other things you want to substitute, deciding a strategy of how you want to strategically weaponize these group of people from the very first minute of prep time is probably something quite important. Cool, no worries. This house, as animal rights activists, would prioritize highlighting environmental impacts of meat consumption as opposed to invoking empathy in animals. How to do framing for this, moderate/extreme? Depends on if you're good or op, I guess. I think probably if you're top half, go moderate and say you can get as many buy-in from moderate people as possible. If you're back half, go extreme and say, I feel bad because people are basically eating my pet animal or pet pig. It's a strategy thing, I imagine. Cool. There is someone who just joined. Hi,
Yeah,
Wendy.
I just realized that somebody just joined. I think there are no more questions, so we can move ahead and wrap up as well.
Yeah, let me put my Facebook here, so if you need anything, you can DM me on Facebook. I generally respond relatively quickly because I'm a bit chronically online. My PFP has me in a blue shirt, writing and judging a debate, so it should be quite recognizable.
I'll also try to link it when we do upload the video, so that's not a worry. I'll put it in the description if I can.
Yeah. Thank you everyone for being here. It was really fun to see so many passionate people asking questions. It's really sweet. It makes me, I don't know, feel less of an urge to opt out of the fence and rush into the wild and never come back. So that's nice.
Very, very true, Wendy. I think even though we have sometimes a couple of people not showing up because of exam schedules and all the work that they're doing, the ones who do are very passionate and do ask a lot of interesting questions. I've had Toby for the last couple of sessions. He's been engaging our facilitators pretty well. So thank you everybody for joining in. Thank you again, Wendy, for taking this time out and coming ahead and giving us such a wonderful session. We're very glad to have you here with us, and I'm pretty sure that it will be great if we can have you again soon. Thank you so much, Wendy, for joining in. And again, thank you for all the participants as well for coming into the session.
Thank you. I will hopefully see you guys soon.
Take care, everybody. Bye bye.